Most people lose their free will to those programs, and it's that uncompromising will where you keep training the animal to stay, to get beyond all the cravings, the feelings, the habits of the body, and catch yourself.
The most beautiful and powerful thing in the world is a repetitive thought, but sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world is a repetitive thought.
Absolutely.
And we think about the most beautiful things we create is because we're obsessed with this new idea and this new thought that we want to build something. But at the same time, we know countless people who they have a thought every day that says, I'm unlovable, I'm unworthy, I don't deserve love in my life. If someone's having a negative, repetitive thought, specifically around self-worth, what they believe they deserve in love, where do they start with that thought?
Well, we think primarily 90% of the time we think the same thoughts as we thought the day before. The challenge with that is the thought that you keep thinking over and over again becomes a belief. And nerve cells that fire together wire together. So the more nerve cells fire, the more they develop long-term relationships, and the more hardwired they become. The more hardwired they become, the more automatic they are. The more automatic they are, the more unconscious they become. So the process of change really requires becoming conscious of your unconscious thoughts, which means just because you have that thought doesn't necessarily mean it's the truth. If you have that thought and you accept it, you believe it, you surrender to it without analyzing it, that thought will lead to the same choice, which will lead to the same behavior, which will create the same experience, which then will produce the same emotion. The same emotions then drive our very same thoughts. In time, our biology, our neurocircuitry, our neurochemistry, our hormones, and even our gene expression stays the same because we're the same. So in the process of change, when you come up against that unconscious belief and you make it conscious, most people get uncomfortable when they confront that thought. And they're stopping an automatic process. And the body, which has been conditioned to be the mind because it's doing something over and over again, that's a habit, is craving the experience because it wants the emotion associated with it, right? So the thought of being unworthy produces the feeling of being unworthy. That feeling then, when the person feels unworthy, tends to cause the person to think more unworthy thoughts. It only takes a thought and a feeling, an image of yourself and an emotion, a stimulus and response, and you can condition the body to memorize that behavior and that emotional state better than the conscious mind. So the moment we inhibit that thought, or the moment we become conscious of it and we no longer accept it, there's a biological craving that takes place in the body because the body has been conditioned to be the mind. So the body starts influencing the mind to think more corresponding thoughts equal to that feeling. So here comes the assault. And you're not only unworthy, you're everything else that goes along with that feeling. And this is where people have to make up their mind if they truly want to change. Because if you decide to confront that thought and make a different choice, get ready because you're going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel unfamiliar. And there's going to be some uncertainty because you're stepping out of familiar territory. You're stepping out of the known and you're stepping into the unknown. Now, this is really when you leave the bleachers and you get on the playing field because the brain immediately looks around in its environment to see if anything's changing because you're changing, and you see that nothing in your world is changing because you actually haven't fully changed yet. So the moment we look for evidence in our life and we don't see it, sooner or later, most people accept that thought, which leads to the same choice, which creates the same behavior, which creates the same experience, that produces the same feeling. Then they say, oh, this feels right to me. No, that feels familiar because you've just returned back to the known self. I think that when people truly want to make up their mind to change and they become so conscious of those unconscious thoughts, they would never go unconscious to them again. That's the moment the body is being reconditioned to a new mind. If you inhibit that choice, that leads to that habit or that behavior. A habit is when you've done something so many times, the body knows how to do it better than the brain. Now you're stopping the body from being on its automation, on autopilot. And if the body's craving the feeling of unworthiness and you're stopping the body from feeling that way, and you're aware in your life how you speak, you're aware in your life how you're feeling, and you're checking in, you're saying, do I really want to feel this way? This is that river of change where you're going from the old self to the new self. So it makes sense then. If those principles in biology work in that way, they could actually work in our favor. So if you said, okay, I'm going to sit down for a few minutes, I'm going to become so conscious of my unconscious self, my unconscious personality, that the victory today would not be going unconscious to those thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. Okay, let me get so familiar with them that I don't go unconscious. Okay, I got that down. Now, what thoughts do I want to fire and wire in my brain? And if a belief is a thought that you keep thinking over and over again, with intention and with attention, you'll switch on that prefrontal cortex and assign meaning to the act and start installing new circuits in your brain. If you keep doing it over and over again, it becomes more hardwired, it becomes more automatic. And now you're installing a new belief that you are worthy of love, you are worthy of abundance, you are worthy to heal, whatever that is. That's the thought you do want to believe in. And when it matters the most is when it's the hardest. Because if you don't have the circuitry in place, you'll default back to the old programs, right? So then if you said, how am I going to be in my Zoom calls today? How am I going to be in traffic today? How am I going to be with my ex, my coworkers? And you started thinking about and rehearsing how you were going to act in certain situations. The brain actually doesn't know the difference between the real life experience and what you're imagining. The research on mental rehearsal shows that the brain will look like in time that it's already had the experience and it's vacant of the experience. Now, keep firing and wiring those circuits and you're going to begin to behave that way. So now you're installing circuitry now to use in your life to get your behaviors to match your intentions. If you said, how would it feel to feel worthy of love? How would it feel to be grateful for life? How would it feel to be worthy of abundance? And you said, I'm going to teach my body emotionally what this feels like before the manifestation of the event. You're not waiting for your life to change to feel worthy. You're actually changing your life by becoming worthy. You're generating abundance. You're generating love. You're creating an elevated emotion. Now, our data is so compelling because when you truly begin to elevate your emotional state, and you could really lock in, to those elevated emotions, your body is so objective that it actually believes that it's living in a whole new environment before the environment changes. In other words, the body's believing it's in that new future. And if the environment signals the gene, and it does, and the end product of an experience in the environment is an emotion, you're actually signaling genes ahead of the environment, and your body will begin to become conditioned to a new mind. Now think about this. If you did that every day, the word meditation literally means become familiar with. You become familiar with your old self, you become familiar with your new self, and you say, I'm not getting up until I feel this feeling. And then you'd say, I want to be able to bring this feeling up whenever I want. I want to keep remembering this feeling over and over again. It only takes a thought and a feeling, an image of the future and emotion, a stimulus and response. You can condition your body to believe it's living in a whole new life. And when you feel the emotions of your future, something amazing happens. You're no longer in lack or separation, so you're no longer looking for the event to take away that feeling of lack or separation. Your body's actually believing it's in the event. And so then you're not looking for it. You feel like it's already happened. Get ready, because that's when your life begins to change. And so we've discovered that if you're actually practicing this and you immersed yourself in that experience fully for 7 days, the amount of metabolic and biological changes that will take place in your body will be so significant that your body will actually believe it's living in that future. And yet, most of the people that come to our workshops are literally in a ballroom. There's nothing really exciting happening in the environment, but their body's believing they're living in a whole new life. And so one thought leads to a choice, which leads to a behavior, which creates an experience that produces an emotion. So then new information, new knowledge begins to cause you to think differently. If you can remember that knowledge and begin to make a different choice because you want to experience the truth of that information, you'll have to behave differently. And when the experience occurs and you feel the feeling of your abundance or wealth, I guarantee you're going to continue wanting to make the process of change something consistent in your life.
This is why I love talking to you. I mean, that literally, what you just said there, I hope everyone listens to it again and again and again. And partly, I think there's something to be said for that. The best things that have rewired my brain and my mind were things that I repeated daily. I took something that I loved listening to or loved learning or reading a paragraph of a book, and I would literally just reprogram myself by giving that to my mind every single day.
Yeah.
And as I'm listening to you talk, I think there's a few really powerful things I wanted to pull out. When I lived as a monk and studied the Vedas, they would talk about thoughts in different modes. And there are 3 modes: the mode of ignorance, the mode of passion, and the mode of goodness. And there's a hierarchy to those thoughts. And so the mode of ignorance would be an unfulfilling thought or a completely fear or insecurity-based thought, which would be, I am not worthy, or I am unlucky and I can't do that. I can't be in love. No one can be in love with me. That's like a mode of ignorance thought. A mode of passion thought would be, I can be in love with anyone I want and I can find anything. And it's almost like you're lying to yourself and you haven't really applied what you're saying, and it's just this big, bold statement, but it doesn't quite sit and resonate. And the mode of goodness thought is, I can take steps daily to create love in my life right now. And you start to see how people would often look at what we're saying and they think, oh, it's just positive thinking. It isn't. It's not just a false statement. What you're saying is two words you used, intention and attention. You're actually being conscious about where that intention and the attention is being placed. You're intending that if I do something every day and I place my attention on X, Y, Z, then I can create this new reality for myself. Whenever I have a tough conversation coming up, a tough meeting, something difficult, I'll rehearse it in my head. And you're so right that you can prepare for the future. Even when I do skydiving or if I'm sitting in a cold plunge, I'm preparing my mind before I even do it. There's no point of just jumping in and diving in. I think what's really interesting is that partly a lot of the anxiety and stress we feel is because we kind of hope that we'll never feel anxiety and stress again. So there's a sense of like, okay, I can get to a place where I never experience anxiety. I almost think that sets us up to be more hurt by the anxiety and inevitable uncertainty we'll feel. I would love to hear your thoughts.
Gosh, I'd love to respond. I got 3 thoughts going on at the same time.
Do it.
So to fulfill the first part of that question, it's an experiment, right? It's an experiment. Life is an experiment. So if your personality creates your personal reality, and your personality is made up of how you think, how you act and how you feel. If you keep thinking the same way, you keep acting the same way, you keep feeling the same way, your life is going to stay the same because you're the same. So the experiment is, okay, let me begin to think differently. So I got to remind myself how I do want to think, and I have to remind myself of how I no longer want to think, so I don't default and go unconscious. Let me remind myself how I'm going to behave so that I could actually get my behaviors to match my intentions. And let me remind myself of how I'm going to feel. If I'm able to succeed in that day, then there should be some change in my life. It's the experiment. And if it doesn't change, that doesn't mean the law doesn't work for you. It's just, you're not that good yet. You just got to keep practicing, right? So the act of disconnecting from your life long enough to remind yourself of who you do want to be and who you no longer want to be, that experiment then is the experiment called life. Now, it's not that you react. The question is, how long are you going to react? That's the real question. Because, I react all the time. Everybody does. But if you're going to stay there and you're going to live in that emotional state, you will see life through that lens of that emotion, right? So now it gets complicated because the stronger the emotion you feel towards certain people or problems in your life, the more you pay attention to them. And where you place your attention is where you place your energy. So from a purely biological as well as quantum state, we could say then you're using that person or that circumstance to reaffirm your dependence on feeling that emotion. So you have to hate your enemy. And if your enemy dies, you'll find another person to hate because that is the response, right? So the body is the animal. It's been conditioned a certain way. And if it's been doing something and feeling something for an extended period of time, there's a modification of its receptor sites. It's needing those emotional states. So in the process of change, just be ready because you're going to feel uncomfortable a lot of the time. Now, the question is, do you want to stay there? So then most people think they don't have any control over their emotional state. They think, I'm just this way and I feel this way. Well, we actually can show people that that's not the truth, that when it's the hardest, it matters the most. And if you're able to really work and train your body like you're training an animal to stop feeling one way and start feeling another way, if you believe that you're an eternal being, let's just say that, just most religions talk about we're eternal, and most sects have thought, only a few that don't, whether you're going to heaven or hell or nirvana or on the wheel, you're pretty much going to be around for a long time. That moment matters so much in the light of eternity because that's the moment you make up your mind to no longer be defined by your past. Why are you being defined by your past? Because emotions are a record of the past. And so then if you're feeling that emotion, your body is believing it's back in that same experience of the past. So the more knowledge that we have and understanding that justified, valid or not, those emotions are hurting no other person but you, because the long-term effects of living by those emotional states, those survival states, are actually downregulating genes and creating diseases. Sooner or later, you're going to have to ask yourself, is this loving to myself? And forgiveness is just when you overcome the emotion, you take your attention off that person or that problem, and you're freeing yourself and you're freeing them. So people do the best with what they think is available. That's my belief. And if you're unaware that you can control your emotional states, you'll rely on something outside of you to do that, whether it's a computer game, whether it's a Netflix show, and whether it's a drug, whatever it is that you need to make that feeling go away, you're dependent on your outer world. And I think that's a hypnosis, that's a conditioning. Teach people that you can actually regulate and change your emotional states. You give them the tools to literally step into a new future. So that process, of course, is extremely uncomfortable. And the question is, how long are you going to stay in that emotional state? And 50% of the story that most people tell about that past experience isn't even the truth, because they're making things up, and they're doing that so that they can justify why they haven't changed since some past event. Most people reach a point in their life where they reach crisis or disease or diagnosis or loss or betrayal where they finally go, gosh, it's time to change. I think change is an ongoing process, and the more we change, the more we should see evidence in our life. That makes it exciting.
Yeah, and I think you're right that I've thought about this for a while, that I feel most people know that they want to change, and most people know what they want to change, but they still struggle to make a change. And so I found that we don't often have a values crisis, we have a habits crisis, because people don't know how to reprogram their habits, and they've started to assume that the way they feel is who they are. And I wonder how you think about this, because I think we're living at a time where what you just said is like you either kind of find a way to numb your feelings, so you're turning towards something external to numb how you feel, or today we're being told, well, feel every feeling and emotion completely. And then often we don't kind of get to the reprogramming phase. So I guess, how do you know how long to take a feeling seriously, effectively, and assessing it before you kind of take action on it?
Feelings and emotions are the end product of past experiences, and we can remember experiences better because we can remember how they feel. The stronger the emotion we have to some experience in our life, the more altered we are inside of us. The more the brain freezes a frame and takes a snapshot. And that's called a long-term memory. That image is being bossed neurologically in the brain. So then What most people don't know is that every time they remember that event, that trauma, that betrayal, that loss, whatever it is, they're producing the same chemistry in their brain and body as if the event is occurring. So what happens over time is that conditioned process conditions the body to literally live in the past. So if a person is living by the same familiar feeling every single day, whether it's guilt or unworthiness or pain or suffering or victimization or depression or whatever it is, it's so important for them to come right up against that emotional state because they're coming up against the known. The question fundamentally becomes, for that person, is it possible then to feel a different feeling? Now, if you cannot feel a different feeling other than the feeling that you're used to feeling, it should tell you volumes about that feeling because it's going to influence your very same thoughts. So the research that we've done over and over again is that the only way you're actually going to reprogram your brain to work in your favor is you got to learn how to regulate your brainwaves. And you know this, of course. Beta brainwave patterns are thinking brainwave patterns. It's the analytical mind. It's our critical facilities. We're in beta right now. We're aware of our bodies. We're aware of the environment. We're aware of time. The neocortex is switched on. It's what plugs us into three-dimensional reality. It's the seat of the autobiographical self. There's a lot of circuits in there from things you've learned intellectually and things you've experienced in your life. So for the most part, it's a repository of the past, right? And so 90% of those thoughts that we think being the same thoughts as the day before tend to become like automatic programs, and they become more subconscious and more unconscious. So in order for us to begin to change those programs, we got to get into the operating system. And the only way we do that is we got to slow our brainwaves down in that thinking neocortex. The challenge for most people is they have so many demands in their life. They have so many emotional responses to circumstances in their life that they're living in a state of stress and living in a state of survival. In a state of stress and survival, you don't close your eyes. You got to keep your eye on the ball. You got to keep your attention on the outer environment. So their brains tend to work in a higher brainwave pattern, a mid-range or high-level beta brainwave pattern. That's like driving your sports car in first gear. It's a lot of energy for the brain. So learning how to regulate and slow your brainwaves down is something that we've been very, very interested in. When you teach people how to do that, it could become a skill. And when the brain starts to relax and it moves into less of that chatter that takes place in your brain and more of kind of an imaginary state, the brain sees in pictures and images, it's more creative, we're moving into that alpha state. So now the door between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind opens up as we get beyond our analytical mind. And our analytical mind is actually what separates the conscious mind from the subconscious mind. So as you slow your brainwaves down, you get into alpha, you're entering the operating system. And that's where you can rewrite a new program. That's where you can rehearse a new script. That's where you can begin to plan your behaviors in an intentional way. If you can't change your brainwaves, then it's like your computer running amok with all of those programs and you yelling at it, telling it to stop. You're not in the operating system. Some people can get to the point where they're so relaxed that the body's in a light sleep, and yet they're conscious and awake, and now they're in this theta brainwave pattern. And in theta, that's a hypnotic state. We're very suggestible to our thoughts. We're very suggestible to information in that state. And that state then is where we see the most change take place. And so the person can literally change from the inside out when they learn how to get into the operating system.
You've just hit the nail on the head with the constant experience everyone has. I think, again, going back to what I was saying, that when we're trying to make a change, the thing that blocks us from making the change is usually stress. If I'm trying to be a kind, loving, compassionate person, but I'm stressed out, I'm likelier to be snappy and rude and condescending. If I'm trying to be healthier in my diet, but I'm stressed out or burnt out, I'm going to reach for the sugary food or the carbs and the fat. Like that doesn't come from anything else but stress.
To take away the feeling.
To take away the feeling.
Take away the feeling, right?
Yeah.
So let's get real clear, because I think it's important for people to understand when we're talking about stress and we're talking about living in survival. It's so important to name those emotions, because anger and frustration and control and hatred and envy and jealousy and insecurity and unworthiness and guilt and shame and suffering and depression, those are all derived. Those are emotions that are derived from the hormones of stress. And psychology calls those normal states of consciousness. Those are altered states of consciousness. Because in stress, the physiology is that we're knocked out of homeostasis. We're knocked out of balance because we're perceiving some threat, some danger, some emergency. And so the stronger the emotion you feel to whatever stressor there is in your life, the more you pay attention to it. And so in time then, you have to keep your attention on all the important elements in your life. So you sit down to do a meditation. And when you're living in stress and you're living in survival, there's only three things that are important in that moment. Your attention is on your body because you got to preserve it. Your attention is on something in your environment. And what's in your environment? People, objects, things, places. And you're very preoccupied with time. And when you're in stress and you're in survival, the brain goes into a default mode and it's naturally trying to predict the next moment based on what it's learned in the past. And so as you always try to forecast the future based on your memory of the past, you can't be in the present moment, right? So, and yet our model of change, what we discovered is that the only way a person can change is when they get beyond their body, They get beyond all the elements of their environment, and they get beyond that predictable fusion of familiar past, and they sink into the present moment, which is the unknown. So if you can't do that because of the hormones of stress, most people will sit down and they'll say, okay, I'm going to close my eyes. I'm going to start this process where I'm going to rehearse how I'm going to be today. And they start thinking about their cell phone. They start thinking about all their emails. And they start thinking, I can't meditate. There's something wrong with me. It's my mother's fault. And they actually believe that thought to be the truth. And then they get up and they actually reaffirm it and they say, I can't meditate. Now, I can tell you that if you are willing to see that thought as just a thought in your brain and you're curious what's on the other side of that thought, yeah, you're going to feel uncomfortable. But if you had some tools and skills to apply, and you were able to take your attention off your cell phone and settle your body back down into the present moment, that would be a victory. And then your body would say, come on, you got to feel a little frustration now. You got to be impatient. You got to be judgmental. Come on, that's what you always think. That's how you always feel. And you, like an animal, you settle the body back down into the present moment and you tell it it's no longer the mind, that you're the mind. That's a victory. Then the body says, hey, dude, you're super busy. You got a lot of things to do. You got a lot of people to see. You got a lot of places to go. You got a lot of things to do. And you've been doing the same thing every day. Your body's going to want to get up and do something. You're going to want to quit because your brain's telling you that you can't do this. If you had the awareness to settle the body back down into the present moment, you would be executing a will that's greater than the program, because most people lose their free will to those programs. And it's that tedium in the beginning that is an uncompromising will, where you keep training the animal to stay, to take all of its attention off the environment, to get beyond all the cravings, the feelings, the habits of the body, the drives of the body, and catch yourself defaulting to that predictable future, bringing the body back into the present moment, siphoning energy back, your attention into the past based on those familiar emotions of the past. We've discovered that if you're willing to do that for just a few days, you could actually liberate an enormous amount of energy from your body. You go from particle to wave, from matter to energy, and you're literally transmuting those limited emotions into elevated emotions, and something really beautiful happens if you're willing to fire the crucible and sit through that long enough. All of these emotions move, that energy moves right up into the heart, and the person starts falling in love with life. They start feeling this state of gratitude, this gratefulness to be alive, this ineffable word of relax.